Hello, my friends. It's Wednesday, and I'm Mary Rose Wood. It's so good to be here. I'm going to get this blue stripe across the bottom of my face in a minute here. Let me just remind you what it means. Are you on Facebook? Go to streamer.com/Facebook and give permission to show your name. I hope you will give permission to show your name because I love to know who's here. And if you comment, I love to know who's commenting. So hello. You know what we do on Wednesdays. We talk about writing craft. We talk about story structure. We answer your questions and we share a little storyteller energy together. I'm here to mentor you and to support you. My name is Mary Rose Wood. I'm an author and I'm also the founder of Path of the Storyteller, which is my own program that offers training, community, accountability, mentorship, and a lot of fun to my students. And I hope maybe someday you'll be one of them. So today we are talking about something that actually was a question from one of our regulars here, who very, very politely pointed out to me that although I love to talk about writing from the hero's perspective, focusing on that hero's personal journey of transformation, having some discipline about point of view and keeping your point of view close to your viewpoint character, who is almost certainly going to be your hero, I myself have recently published a book that is written from an omniscient third person and travels with, whimsy into different characters' experience. And would I speak to that, and would I speak to the concept in general of writing from multiple points of view? And I so love this question. And it's such a common impulse that writers have to write from multiple points of view. And so I just, let me tell you what my plan is for today. I want to talk about how to do it. I want to talk about how to incorporate multiple character perspectives in your narrative. So we're going to talk about the how, but I also want to talk about the why. Why should you do this? And why shouldn't you do this? What helps you make a decision about whether that's the way to go? And as a little bit of a coda, I also promise to answer the question of why I tend to encourage people not to. Why a lot of my teaching comes from a perspective of encouraging you writers out there to dig deeper into your main character and to resist the urge to do fancy structural cartwheels like multiple points of view. So we're going to talk about the how, we're going to talk about the why, and then I am going to confess my true motives. Sound good? All right. I hope you are all ready. I want to say hi to some of my friends and students out there. Hey, Terry. Hey, Rosalind. Hey, Chris. Hey, Angelica. I am so glad to see you all here today. I really look forward to your participation. Okay. First of all, what do we mean when we say multiple points of view? What do we mean by it? So we have a story that's got more than one character in it, right? And that character, the one that we consider our main character, our hero, our protagonist, right, is the one who we spend the most time with and whose journey of transformation is actually the structure upon which our narrative is built. But that character is not alone, right? The character is not alone in the story. There are other characters as well. And so when we talk about point of view, we're saying that this character's experience is like, to use a cinematic comparison, is like the camera that is shooting the action, that we are sitting, if you will, on the shoulder of this main character. They are our, like the hero cam, right? That they're the point of view. They're the one that's watching it. If you've ever had fun on YouTube and saw one of those great videos when someone takes a webcam or a GoPro and they strap it to their dog's collar and they set the dog loose, and so you get the dog's experience. Like, that's the dog's point of view. So that's one of the things we mean when we talk about point of view. Like, who's doing the looking? Whose experience are we readers being invited to follow by the storyteller. So if you have multiple points of view, it means that you have chosen to give a variety of characters in your narrative the opportunity to wear the GoPro. It's not always on the same dog, right? Like sometimes the GoPro's on your cat, sometimes it's on the dog, sometimes it's on you. You're creating a multifaceted way of looking at the events of the story by letting the reader experience them as different characters experience them. We call each of those characters the viewpoint character when it is their turn. When it is their turn to be wearing the GoPro, they are the viewpoint character. So that is what we mean by point of view. So before I go on, if anyone is not clear about that, pop a comment in and let me know so that I can make sure we all understand what I mean by point of view. All right, we're good. Okay, I see we're all good. So how do we incorporate multiple points of view in a narrative? There's two main approaches, and it depends which point of view you are writing from in terms of your narrative as a whole. And so now I'm switching to the more conventional use of the term point of view, first person point of view or third person point of view. I am not going to do a deep dive into weird alternate points of view that are neither first nor third. Yes, there is second person point of view. There's all kinds of varieties. There's no end to writers' creativity and inventiveness, as you know. Mostly we're going to be in either first or third. So first person point of view is the point of view where the character is speaking in their own voice. Reader, I married him. That's from Jane Eyre. It's written in the first person. Jane is speaking to us. So who's wearing the GoPro? This is such an anachronistic thing to think of Jane Eyre actually dealing with the webcam. But bear with me. Play along with me for a minute. Who's wearing the GoPro in Jane Eyre? It's Jane. It's Jane. It's Jane. Page after page after page after page. It's only Jane. We only know what Jane knows. We only experience what happens in the rooms that Jane is in. And we only learn about offstage events or information as Jane learns about them. There's no other source of information. We are in Jane's consciousness the whole way. So that is a classic example of first person. Let's stick with this for a minute. Let's say you have decided to write a narrative in the first person and you also want to incorporate multiple viewpoint characters. So your options are limited, right? Because first person, by definition, is somebody speaking to the reader or the illusion of somebody speaking to the reader, right? What can you do? You can alternate speakers. You can pass the talking stick around your narrative. You can give a chapter to one character and you can give a chapter to another character. Now, there are many successful examples of writers doing this, incorporating multiple viewpoint characters in a first-person book. The one that comes to mind, because it was such a massive sensation and remains so, is George R.R. Martin's epic fantasy series, Game of Thrones, which incorporates so many points of view. Each character is, actually, I'm jumping the gun here because that's not written in the first person. That's actually not written in the first person. That's written in the third person. Here's a first person example. There's a really, really fun young adult novel by David Levithan and John Green, co-written by them, called Will Grayson. I don't know if anybody's read that. Some of my YA fans out there may know it. And it's about two boys, and they're both named Will Grayson, and they're each given a chapter, right? They alternate chapters. Now, this is a kind of a fun trick because this was a co-written book. And so we have two authors, and each one decided to write one of the Will Graysons. Now, the book is very cleverly structured, almost like a puzzle. The two Will Graysons have separate experiences, and then they come together, and then they have a shared experience, and that gets narrated in alternating chapters. So some of you might have other favorite books where you've got first-person narrators that switch, that alternate back and forth. But if you're writing in the first person, that's basically your option, all right? So it raises the question of, if you wanted to incorporate a lot of different points of view, why choose first person in the first place, but we're going to get to the why in a minute. So that's the how of first person. You're going to be alternating speakers. Now, I would recommend that you are kind and respectful to your reader who is working hard to follow your narrative, and that you alternate speakers only when it's kind of logical to do so. That you alternate speakers maybe per chapter or, per scene, but you don't do it randomly. So you're not going to switch who's talking in the middle of a paragraph, unless there's no hard and fast rules in art. You can do whatever works, but just remember how much work you're creating for your reader if you switch speakers without some kind of format that makes it easy to follow. All right, so that is the first person. Now I'm going to just check in here because I see we already have some questions coming in, which I love. Here, I'm going to make this a little bit different. Let's see. Rosalind's got a question. Now here's a great comment. Can it work to not only alternate speakers but also put in letters from different characters to the main first person character? How well does that work? Well, so now Rosalind's suggesting like another technique, which is very useful, and it's very useful in any narrative, which is the incorporation of you sort of found material, right? So let's say your viewpoint character gets a letter. That's fantastic. They get a letter, they open it up. We get to read the letter as they're reading it. So Rosalind, I certainly have used that. There's any number of times in the Incorrigible Children books that Miss Penelope Lumley receives a letter from Simon Harley Dickinson, from Miss Charlotte Mortimer. It happens a lot. I actually love incorporating correspondence into a narrative. But here's the difference, here's the nuance, I should say. So when there's a letter arriving, to whom is it arriving and who's doing the reading? Now, if I have Miss Charlotte Mortimer send a letter to Miss Penelope Lumley, but I am telling my story from Miss Penelope Lumley's viewpoint, then the scene is Miss Penelope Lumley gets the mail, terribly excited, runs back to her room, opens the envelope, and reads the letter. So we readers have a kind of a double experience, which is that we are in Penelope's viewpoint. She's the viewpoint character. We are reading the letter only because Penelope is reading it. What we don't do in that usage is we don't read a letter that the recipient is not that she hasn't opened yet. We don't get to read the letter before she does. So it's a lovely, lovely way of incorporating someone else's voice into a narrative, and it works in both first person and third person narratives. It does incorporate somebody else's voice, but it doesn't necessarily shift the viewpoint character, does it? Because somebody's reading that letter. Now, you can, if you want to get super fancy and write a book that has almost like a collage type structure, which people do. It's a more experimental type of form. But you can construct narratives that are made out of letters, that are made out of text exchanges, that are made out of scrap of pages, and then that your finished book is a replica, in a sense, of those. Oh, somebody help me out. I'm going to forget the name, but there was a very popular series of books that I think were just an exchange of postcards. So if someone knows who did those, put it in the comments, because I can't remember the name of them, but I know that people were very, very hot about them for a while. But that we're just, the reader is a kind of a voyeur. We're peeking in to somebody's scrapbook or correspondence, right? So that is another technique. So you can bring in all kinds of information using letters, texts, voicemails, found written material. But it's not quite the same as making a decision about whose point of view is seeing it. Someone is either experiencing them and the reader is experiencing it because that viewpoint character is experiencing them, or you've created a book that has got a sort of collage structure where this stuff is just laid out for the reader to interpret, which has been done to great success. Okay. So so talking about first person, those are some of our options. You can alternate who's speaking, or you can incorporate this other kind of material that Rosalind raises, right? That the person could get a letter or whatever, and that kind of creates an alternate voice without switching to a new viewpoint character. But multiple point of view really does suggest that we're looking at not sticking with one viewpoint character throughout. All right, that's how I interpret it to me. All right, now to get back to where I was going when I was talking about Game of Thrones, what if we're writing in the third person? Well, the third person is kind of built to do this in a way. You just, as Chris Go has it, Griffin and Sabine, or Sabine, I don't know how they pronounce it. That's it. There's exchange of correspondence, and it was a very, very, very hot book. I don't know if out there have looked at those. Yeah, and you know, the epistolary novel is something that is also worth mentioning. So thank you for getting that that title for me, Chris. An epistolary novel, as I'm sure you all know, is a book that is simply exchange of correspondence. That is it, and so that's a very traditional form, of course, and a modern twist on that, like the Griffin and Sabine books. It, you know, nowadays we can do epistolary novels that have this collage feeling because we don't just exchange letters, right? We exchange all kinds of nonverbal communication. So you get to incorporate all of that. As a writer, you have the freedom to incorporate all of that onto the page. All right, so that's all super fun. Now, third person point of view, just a reminder, a refresher. Third person point of view is when there's a kind of a narrator, a narrating consciousness, not the main character, not a character in the tale, but an unnamed or maybe named or usually unnamed storyteller, a storytelling entity, a storytelling consciousness that is telling the tale. Now, when we talk about third person, we talk about the different gears that you can shift into when you're writing in third person. And one of them is omniscient, all-knowing, this godlike, long, deep view of everything that's going on in the universe of the book, everything that's going on inside the private ruminations of every character in the book. That is what omniscient means. The alternate gear in third person is close third person. And if you are super interested in a deep dive into that, I did a whole talk of just about point of view and go into a little bit more detail. So you can check out that video on the YouTube channel. But when we write in third person, it's not an either or proposition, because you tend to shift gears when you write in third person. You tend to establish settings and summarize chunks of time and incorporate information that your characters may not know in a kind of an omniscient tone, in an omniscient mode. Then you shift gears, you zoom in, and you get close to your viewpoint character. You wouldn't write a whole novel necessarily, I don't recommend it, from a truly omniscient standpoint. Now, forgive me for reading aloud, because you know I love read aloud. Just coincidentally, I have a copy of Karenina next to my desk. Who doesn't? Doesn't, right? So I'm going to read the very opening paragraph of Anna Karenina. This is the newer translation by Richard Pavir and Larissa Volokonski. So buckle your seatbelts for a minty fresh blast of omniscient narration. Okay, you ready for this? All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. All was confusion in the Oblonsky's house. The wife had found out that the husband was having an affair with their former French governess and had announced to the husband that she could not live in the same house with him. The situation had continued for 3 days now and was painfully felt by the couple themselves, as well as by all the members of the family and household. They felt there was no sense in their living together, and that people who meet accidentally at any inn have more connection with each other than they, the members of the family and household of the Oblonskys. The wife would not leave her rooms. The husband was away for the 3rd day. The children were running all over the house as if lost. The English governess quarreled with the housekeeper and wrote a note to a friend, asking her to find her a new place. The cook had already left the premises the day before at dinner time. The kitchen maid and coachman had given notice. How omniscient is that? Everyone in this household is revealed in the opening paragraph of Anna Karenina, right? Everyone, what they're feeling, what they're doing, what they're hiding from each other, what they're writing in their correspondence, the new jobs they're looking for, right? It's all there. That is omniscient to the max. It's so delightful. It's a great way to get the story started, right? We are plunged into a household in uproar. Now, would you like to read an entire novel that every paragraph had to sum up what was going on with every character? No, it would be exhausting. That is a very, very entertaining and high energy and attention grabbing opening. It raises all kinds of dramatic questions, but we don't yet know which of the Oblonskys, whose side are we on? You know, we're just being introduced to the scenario. It is definitely a world in crisis, so it's a perfect place to begin a tale. But we wouldn't want the whole book to be written that way. It would be impossible to follow, all right? So what happens when you're writing in 3rd person is that you might incorporate passages of omniscience, but then you are going to zoom in. You're going to pick somebody. You're going to put the GoPro on the back of a particular dog, and you're going to take the tale from their point of view. So 3rd person is, it's sort of built to allow us to incorporate multiple points of view. And yet, we don't want to forget whose story it is, do we? Right? We don't want to just tell the story of every single member of that household even-handedly. They're not all equally relevant to our project. Eventually, you know, in our conceiving of a book like that, even if we plan to write it in the 3rd person, we're going to zero in on the main plot. So what you can do in a 3rd person book to incorporate the viewpoints of different characters is do what I was mentioning that George Martin does in Game of Thrones, which is that you can, when you use the omniscient to set it up, but you can then zoom in to different viewpoint characters. You can tell a chapter or a passage or a scene from the viewpoint of one character. And then, because of the magic of 3rd person, you don't have to switch voices. You can stay with your 3rd person narrative voice, but the viewpoint character can switch to somebody else. It can. The same caveat applies, though, because every time you switch a viewpoint character, you risk confusing the reader. You derail them from the identification with the character that they were in, and it jars them. It costs them some effort. So you're always running the risk of confusing the reader and losing the thread. And when I say losing the thread, I don't just mean logically. I don't just mean in terms of plot. More importantly, losing the thread emotionally, losing the thread of caring, of being immersed in that main character's experience to the point where they're going to keep reading no matter what to find out what happens. You might have the experience, as I think most of us do, of channel surfing, of being, you know, in front of Netflix and going through and checking a bunch of things, or going on YouTube or wherever and just watching a little bit of a lot of things. You don't want to create that experience for your reader, right? You don't want to give them a little bit of a lot of things. It's not engaging. They are actually looking for one thing, that grabs their attention, that they can fix on and hang out with. And it's just as you are, you're looking for the story that engages you. So, so that's the how to do it. That's the how to do it. In first person, you've got these techniques of actually switching who's speaking. In third person, you have this incredibly flexible mechanism that allows you to be omniscient and then zoom in to a viewpoint character and then switch without, without having to tear it up and start over again. And then you also have these additional techniques of incorporating letters, correspondence, found material that can bring other voices into the narrative. All right, so that is the how. Why? The bigger question always is, why do we want to do this? Now, I'm going to let you know what I think are the main things you consider, and I would love to know how you decide, and also, of course, if you've read things that work or don't work because of this technique, please share. I'd love to know. So I always say, because of the cost to the reader, right? If the story that you want to tell can be told in no other way, that's one reason why to do it. That is one reason why to do it. And what kinds of stories can be told in no other way? Well, for example, let's say you're writing something that has a very epic scale, that has multiple generations, that's weaving together stories of multiple generations of a family, right? That's not an uncommon thing to happen in a novel, right? You might decide that the scope of your narrative is so broad that you really need to have chunks of it told from different points of view. Maybe they might be in different eras. That's great. It's wonderful. That it's perfectly good reason why, and you'll see that done a lot. And those narratives will often be written in a third person because third person has the heft and capacity and flexibility to do that. But if you wrote something that's in the first person and you have characters in a different era who are telling their version of the story, these are all structures that could potentially work. Potentially, we're going to get to what makes them work and not work too. The other reason, other than epic scope and perhaps like a very broad timeline, that you might want to choose to use multiple points of view is theme. And this to me is really the more meaningful question to ask. What is it about the theme of your story, what you're trying to say with it, that insists upon incorporating different viewpoints? And this is where I want to speak personally on a more personal level about my most recent book, which is a middle grade book called Alice's Farm, A Rabbit's Tale, which does in fact incorporate multiple viewpoint characters. And some of them are animals and some of them are people. And it is written in the third person. And so there is this narrating consciousness, but that narrating consciousness zooms in to one character, Alice, who's a Eastern Cottontail, and then it later in another chapter it zooms into Carl, who's a boy who's just moved to a rural area because his family, who are Brooklyn hipsters and very excited and well-intended, but not terribly well-informed about farm life, have decided that they're going to buy a farm and they're going to have a different kind of life. And then there were also passages written from the experience of some of the other animals. Some of the main characters in the book include the dog that belongs to this family. Her name is Foxy. She's a Shiba Inu. And there were passages written from Foxy's point of view. There are passages written from, there is an actual fox. So Foxy is a dog, but there's an actual fox, whimsically named Doggo, in the book. And there's actually a important passage written from his point of view. There's another human character, the next door neighbor, Farmer Janice, who is an experienced farmer who takes on the role of mentor to this lovely family from Brooklyn called the Harveys, and tries to teach them a little bit about how to be successful as a farmer. But there are also, her point of view is also expressed in various times in the book. Now, why so? Why so? Why not just tell the whole story from the point of view of Alice? The title, like Anna Karenina, is about Anna Karenina, but it's also about a lot of other things. Alice's Farm, A Rabbit's Tale is about Alice. It is about what Alice does and why she does it, but it's also about a lot of other things. So the theme of the book has to do with community. It has to do with encounters between creatures who are unlike each other, who don't know about each other, and who have preconceived notions about each other. The Harveys, sweet, adorable Harveys from the city, have idealistic, preconceived notions about what it will be like to leave the city and go live on a farm and be farmers. The rabbits, who've been living across the meadow from this farm that has been empty for a couple of years, have preconceived notions about what it would be like if actual human farmers returned. It would be both good and bad. Many of the rabbits think it would be terrible because farmers are dangerous. They have shotguns and they have dogs. A few of the rabbits think that it would be dangerous but worth the risk because farmers also bring with them vegetable gardens. So with, that the pros and cons of this are debated within the book. The people who live in this area have preconceived notions about what a family from the city might be like. The kids, when Carl Harvey, who's lived all his life in the city and is now in the country, when he has his first tentative encounters with the kids who've grown up in the country, they have preconceived notions about each other. What is a city kid like? What is a farm kid like? The animals that are natural enemies to each other, rabbits and foxes, for example. One is a predator, one is prey. There's a significant presence in the book. One of the characters is an American bald eagle named John Glenn, for reasons that are revealed in the book. And John Glenn is an apex predator. So we have an encounter that blossoms into a profound friendship between an apex predator, the very top of the food chain, and an eastern cottontail who is at the very bottom of the carnivore food chain, right? And you know what I mean by that. Plants, animals that eat plants and then turn into the bottom of the food chain for animals that eat other animals. And so photosynthesis gets turned into tasty bunny meat, and then there's a whole food chain of carnivore animals above that will feast on that, right? So when you are a cottontail, you are prey for everyone. That's what the book is about. So I won't go on, I won't go on about it more. But as you can see from my description, the misunderstandings, the preconceived notions, and the way those preconceived notions are overcome, the way preconceived notions are always overcome in life, by actually being present to one another, being willing to put down your preconceived notions and experience each other fully and start to see things from other people's perspectives. That's how it works. And that's what happens in this book. And so for me, thematically, to incorporate that, I need to show what the fox thinks of what's going on, what the dog thinks of what's going on, what the wild animals think of the tame animal, what the tame animal thinks of the wild animals, what the city people think of the country people, what the rural people think of the city people, right? You see where I'm going with this. It is thematically essential to the book. So even though this book takes place in a single location and in a single season, a growing season, it takes place from spring to harvest time. It required me to imagine myself in all of these different points of view, because the dialogue between them is what the book is about. So having said that, I want to talk about the difference between plot and subplot. Something we haven't talked about here before. You can have multiple plots in a complex narrative, right? So you can take apart a book like Alice's Farm and you can say, well, the main plot is about what this rabbit does to try to save her farmland home from real estate developers. That is the main plot. And then there's a subplot about, what a boy from the city learns by moving to the country. And then there's another plot about how his parents learn to cope with their new life and find their role in this new community. And there's a subplot about how their dog learns to be, to go from being extremely pampered city house pet into quite a brave and heroic farm dog. You can look at these journeys, these independent arcs of different characters as subplots, right? And so I raised that because the notion of subplots is another why. It's another reason that we might have to want to give time to different points of view in a more complex work. So a book that has a main plot and several important subplots may indeed choose to go to those subplots and to spend time with whoever the character at the center of that particular subplot is. They may deserve a little time in their own viewpoint. So now we're starting to talk about how to assemble multiple points of view. In order for it to work for the reader, you're going to want to be clear about which is the main plot and which are the subplots. And you're not going to have too many. You're going to have a main plot and maybe a couple of principal subplot or one principal subplot. And then there may be these tiny little character arcs or rather compressed character arcs that get woven in. And what you're going to find is that each one of these is going to follow the same story structure that we've been talking about on this YouTube channel, this notion of a hero's journey that takes a character through a big change. And through meeting tests, rising up to handle challenges and, confronting misconceptions or challenging encounters that may, force them to pivot, force them to be different than they were at the beginning. If the character doesn't change, it's not really a subplot, So you might have this big plot and then a couple of others woven in. In Alice's Farm, I would consider the plot of Alice the rabbit to be the main plot. But the plot of Carl, the boy, is a substantial subplot. It's almost but not quite equal to hers. And they both get plenty of viewpoint time through this third-person narrator. Now, what holds it together? When you create a book that has that kind of structure of plot and subplots, what holds it all together? Well, here's my answer. My answer is if all of these subplots are simply like variations on a theme, if they're all fundamentally expressing the same story, the same narrative, if they're all going on parallel journeys that lead to a coherent outcome, And in the case of Alice's Farm, there is also something that they all share, which is a shared mission. So we've talked about the mission. This is what drives your hero's actions throughout a tale. If the mission of my main character in Alice's Farm, Alice, is to save her home is this farmland. And if the farmers fail, the bulldozers are going to come. The real estate agent is going to come. It's all going to be sold and destroyed. She wants to save her home. Well, it turns out all the animals want to save their home. And it turns out the Harveys want to save their home. It turns out the other farmers in the community want the Harveys to save their home. Everybody shares this mission. This mission is magnetic. It attracts allies. It attracts people. And so what you find in Alice's Farm is the main plot, the secondary plot, we'll call it the A plot and the B plot, right? The rabbit's plot and the boy's plot are almost identical in that they come together at the midpoint of the book and they're on the same mission. Those two plots actually do merge in the book, and the boy and the rabbit become an incredible team. which is amazing because, as everyone knows, rabbits and farmers are enemies. Well, the fact that, they can see past that is part of what this book is about. But all these other plots, the other animals who realize that they're acting in ways that they might not have thought they were capable of, they're all going on these little journeys of transformation, but all of them have to do with the same theme. And it's the same happens in the human world, right? There's collisions, and it seems like people are on opposite sides, but fundamentally the farmers in a community want each other to succeed, because once the real estate developer comes and the bulldozer, it's bad for everybody, right? It's bad for the animals, it's bad for the farmers. So there are larger themes at work, and the theme and the shared mission is what ties it all together. And that, to me, is one of the arguments that I would make in favor of using multiple viewpoints. If you have a narrative, that your vision for it, if your narrative in the book includes these different threads, but they're all clearly working together, they're all in pursuit of a similar mission. I'll go back to my Wizard of Oz examples, because I can never get through one of these without talking about the Wizard of Oz. But oh yeah, Jaren's ensembles. I put that up there kind of by accident, but yes, ensembles. We talk about an ensemble cast. Sometimes we have an ensemble cast, but even with an ensemble cast, I'm going to pick up Nancy's question next because it's very much like this. Are subplots all related to the main theme? Exactly. So Jaren is saying ensembles, and Nancy's asking, are subplots related to the main theme? My answer is going to be they ought to be, unless it's the subplot of opposition, right? Unless it's, and even that is a relationship. If it's a subplot of one character, your shadow archetype, you might think of them as the villain. I don't like to use that word so much because I think shadow archetype is a richer and more nuanced way to talk about it. And we could certainly talk about that more on another Wednesday. But they might be the cautionary tale. What happens if the theme of this narrative that most of your plots are moving toward, what happens if it goes wrong, if somebody fails to embrace it, if somebody, goes to the dark side, as they say in Star Wars? That is a subplot that might embody the cautionary tale, the funhouse mirror version of it. But you see, that is still a powerful relationship, Nancy. That is the relationship of the shadow archetype to the main theme. So it might have a very different outcome, but it's still profoundly related. It's adding the little bass note. It's adding the little cautionary tale there. So let me bring up one more comment. I like the way in Alice's Farm, showing the different points of view reveals important things about the main characters, Alice and Carl, from finding out what other characters think about them. Yes. Can this be a way to bring out the changes in the main characters through story? Absolutely, Rosalind. We're always contemplating, right, as storytellers, how do we show the reader the change that our hero's going through? How do we depict it? How do we show it? How do we let the reader know? And in real life, it's the same. We know people by what they do, what they say. We know them by the choices they make. That's how we form our opinions of people. We see them for who they are, by their actions. We can't see what's in their heads, right? We can hear what they say. We can see what actions they take. We can see what decisions they make under pressure. That's how we form an opinion of them. But we also form an opinion of them by their reputations. And that's what you're raising, Rosalind, which is that other characters will have opinions, observations, perceptions about each other. And one of the fun things to play with when you do choose and use wisely a multiple point of view structure is that you get to include that perception, and you get to play with how each character sees each other, how they understand or misunderstand each other. And then you're asking your reader, to sort it out, to know what opinions to agree with, what opinions to not, and to form their own opinions, right? Based on the way your character is seen by others. It's a great observation. So, great. All right. Wonderful comments. So here's the last thing before we wrap up. and this is what I promised to talk about. So with all of these glories and with all my own practice and appreciation for what you can do in a novel using multiple viewpoints, why do I always harp on the hero's journey? One hero, one point of view, one mission, stick with it. Don't go wandering off the path, as Gandalf says. Don't leave the path. Why do I? Well, listen, I have been reading as a teacher. I've been reading my students' work for a long time. And I'm going to tell you something. And I say this with love and appreciation because we all have to learn this. The most common kind of lethal errors that developing writers make in their work is a failure to deeply imagine their main character on a journey of change and really depict and deliver on that plot. One plot is enough. Many, many terrific books from Jane Eyre on down are written with a single viewpoint character, with a single journey of transformation, and the book never leaves their side. And they work wonderfully. If you can do that with ease, if you have successfully done it, if you really have that under your belt, level up. Now weave in a subplot. Now weave in several subplots. Now try to play with multiple points of view. The more balls you try to keep in the air, the harder juggling becomes, right? When you learn to juggle, you start by tossing one ball until you get that toss perfectly. Then you add another, then you add a third. It's the same. And I really don't say this because I don't have 100% confidence in all of you to be able to do it. But what I know from reading student work is that the impulse is so ubiquitous that it is almost always a writer who doesn't yet have a really solid grasp of story structure, who's trying to fill pages and they don't know how to do it from their main character's point of view. They're trying to keep the story going, but because they don't have a really nuanced, detailed story structure craft in their toolkit, the impulse is, well, I'm not sure what happens next. Let me bring in a secondary character to do something. Let me cut to what's going on the other side of town. Let me, smoke and mirrors. Let me just keep things busy on the page. The corollary to that not only is the suspiciously unnecessary use of multiple viewpoints, but that the hero themselves becomes kind of passive and sidelined and lost in the sauce. And the mission, the main plot, falls apart. Maybe the writer hasn't even firmly decided what it is. So the impulse to weave in all kinds of extraneous points of view and write big ensemble casts and all that stuff, if you are ready to do it and you can do it, go for it, right? I'm not saying don't do it. It's a fantastic thing to do. It is an advanced practice. And I don't teach doing that until I finish teaching story structure, because you have to know how to do it in one plot solidly, in a satisfying way, succinctly, right? You have to know how to deliver like a clean shot and hit the bullseye. And then once you know how to do it once, then you can do it 10 times. And then you can do it 10 times in a way that is thematically related, that is artfully woven together in a single epic book, in a single long book. There's a great example that is not a long book, but is a book that is near to my heart, and that certainly inspired much of my thinking about Alice's Farm, which of course is Charlotte's Web, right? Now, Charlotte's Web uses an omniscient narrator and multiple points of view. And in fact, it begins on the day that our primary plot is the fate of Wilbur the pig. Will he be slaughtered at Christmas time or not? That is the fate of a spring pig on a farm. And the entire book concerns itself with Wilbur's fate. But that concern with Wilbur's fate is the tale is told by various characters. And in fact, the book begins with Fern, who's the 8-year-old girl who lives on the farm where Wilbur was just born. She starts out as the hero of the tale. But as Wilbur grows up, he quickly takes over the mantle of hero, and we start to hear his story from his perspective. But the opening chapters of Charlotte's Web are told with Fern as the viewpoint character. From a third person omniscient narrator that often, uses Fern as our principal character. She's not the viewpoint character in every sentence, but it's her story, and then it gets passed over to Wilbur. And then later it gets passed over to Charlotte, and we see Charlotte working hard at night alone, building a web, and then we have chapters from her point of view. But what holds it together? Same. Everyone's got the same mission. From the opening sentence of that book, it's to save Wilbur's life. We haven't even met Wilbur yet. But Fern is on a mission to save the life of the runt pig that was born on the farm. And then Wilbur, falls in love with life, wants to be alive, and then learns from the other farm animals that, well, enjoy it while you got it, kid, because this is a farm and you know what happens to pigs here. And he didn't know. How could he know? Once he knows, he's, heartbroken. He has an incredibly moving existential crisis, and he just wants to live. He wants to live and have friends. And I have often said to my students, I find that Wilbur the pig in Charlotte's Web is one of the most human characters ever written, because he's full of fear. He's full of longing. He's lonely. He's afraid to die. He just embodies the most vulnerable qualities of being alive. But his friends rally and they save him. He has a very special friend who's a spider, and thanks to her, not only her heroic efforts, but the teamwork of all of the animals on the farm, Wilbur is saved at the end. And so that is another story that both thematically and structurally works, because all of it is sort of rowing in the same direction. They're all trying to accomplish the same mission. Oh, I just realized I got distracted from my Wizard of Oz reference. Let me finish with that. So the Wizard of Oz, we have a mission with these characters that to go see the wizard, right? And Dorothy Gale is the main character, but then she encounters these other characters on her journey in the second act, which is a very normal thing to do, right? A group of allies, a group of co-travelers, co-adventurers gets formed early in second acts often. So she's got a Tin Man, a Scarecrow, and a Lion. Each one of them has a problem. They each have a plot, right? They each have something that they would like to change. And what do they all have in common? Well, the wizard is the one who's going to help them. So they're all off to see the wizard. It is a shared mission. Dorothy's the main character, but just think about the Scarecrow wants a brain and the Tin Man wants a heart. These are subplots. Do they all get what they want in the end? They kind of do. Right? And you can trace each one of them as a subplot, but they don't derail Dorothy's plot. So that's another way of thinking about plots, subplots, and the value of a shared mission in holding all of that structure together. So we're just about out of time. I'm going to take one last look at the comments, see if anybody has any more questions. It looks like there's some really interesting examples in the comments. I'm not going to read them all, of all the various books you've read that use very complicated structures, So I don't dissuade you from reaching for the stars, but I do encourage you not to underestimate the power of a single hero on a mission. Even a very complicated epic construction of a narrative that has multiple subplots and judiciously uses multiple viewpoints is still delivering satisfaction to the reader based on whether you have delivered a journey of change that is meaningful, that is irrevocable, that is plausible, that has been earned, and at whose center is a character whose fate we really, really, really care about. That's what the reader wants. If you can deliver that, then elaborate. But if you only deliver that, you've delivered more than most writers can. So don't be afraid of clarity and simplicity, all right? Learn how to do that first, and then the world is your oyster. I hope this talk has been a benefit. I'm so grateful for the suggestion to talk about it. I hope it's been of use to you. And as always, I love it. If you have more questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I will answer them. If you're watching on YouTube and you're not subscribed, I hope you will subscribe to the channel, and because this way you'll know what I'm talking about and when new stuff is coming out on the channel. If you like this video, you can even press the little like button. That's very helpful. I appreciate all your participation. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to our next conversation.